Hey, good afternoon. We're here to talk about maintenance schedules. That's to say, how do you maintain a garden over the course of a year, over the course of many seasons, and be able to take care of all the different jobs they're in, whether that be hedging or weeding or planting or any of these other tasks. So you got to figure out how often you're going to do this job. That's to say the frequency, once a week, once a month, once every single year. And then you have to figure out how, when you go back to do this job, how many hours does it take you? How many people hours does it take you to do the particular job? In the gardens, we participate in this act of life and death and everything else around us on a daily basis. And that's part of the fun. So in the realm of creation, we get to plant flowers and trees. The second aspect to keeping a garden looking good and continuing to grow and prosper is just the maintenance of it. So in this case, a lot of times the plants, they get older and they start to get bugs eating them or they start dying, and you go back and treat them. Maybe sometimes you cut off the dead parts. Maybe sometimes you yank the whole thing from down below and throw it away. Go put it in the compost. In other cases, if you're, say, working on some woody shrubs, well, parts of it will die away and you got to prune that back so it looks fresh and new. Or maybe its tops are growing out into the window, blocking the view, and maybe you want to take off a piece there, you want to take off a piece there too. So that's all part of the garden maintenance. And besides that, you might want to go through and look at all the infrastructure, check the irrigation, check all the lines back and through, make sure there's no leaks, nothing been chewing on it, everything still works okay. Add to that the general task of fertilizing and pest control. That all falls under the realm of maintenance. Last but not least, there's the destructive aspect of gardening. That's to say, a lot of times weeds will come in, plants that are in the wrong place, that you just don't want in the landscape, and you got to kill them. There's no other way around it. You can spray them with chemicals, or you can physically try to control them with a hoe or the weed whip or anything, cut them down, dig them out. Like this one here, it's a geranium that comes in, kind of a little bit stinky. You gotta take care of, control that. Or if you get big patches of oxalis, that can tend to take over a garden, kind of weedy. So you might rip that up, throw that out. And last but not least here, some vetch. They come in by itself, start crawling all over, taking all your flower beds. Well, you gotta rip that out too. Say good riddance. This year I'm going to show you 3 general ways that we do maintenance around town. Here in this first garden, we're working at a private residential place. And so imagine, it's kind of like the old-time European aristocracy garden where they got a lot of hedges, straight, long, narrow lines of plants planted, whether as a border or as a barrier. And so you got to go through and make sure that you hedge it all nice and straight. Otherwise, it gets all out of control, just like too much hair growing out everywhere. You got to go get a haircut. Over the course of a year, for sure, you're going to have to do some pruning about the woody shrubs and trees on the premises. Sometimes they just grow too big for their space, and other times a little bit of air circulation in between those branches is going to be good for its health. So you'll go through here and just take a few fine cuts. Bring its form. Oftentimes in nice residential places or in fanciful outdoor places, they like to plant a little bit of color. A couple times a year, they'll plant something that pops up in the spring when all the flowers are blooming, and maybe around these parts, something that comes up in the fall also. Oftentimes, one of the plants of choice for these places with a little bit of color is the tulip. Although in its native land, it's a perennial, grows year after year. Around these parts, because we don't really have the cold winters, we plant it as an annual. That's to say, we'll dig some holes, drop the bulbs in earlier on in the year, they pop up, and then as they start to fade and look no good, we throw them out. We chop them up and throw them out. Otherwise, the gophers get some, the rod gets some, they don't do well next year anyways. Contrast the tulip with something like this. This too, like the tulip, is a bulb, but unlike the tulip, it grows more, multiplies year after year after year until it becomes a bigger and bigger clump. Then every year about this time they start popping out. These purple flowers, real bright psychedelic purple flowers. So this here then is a perennial. Year after year it'll give you steady, reliable blooms. You don't gotta do much to them. You gotta dig them out, you gotta plant them, you gotta fertilize, nothing of the sort. So just between these two plants, even though they're both bulbs, they have a different maintenance routine. So depending on what you plant, how you plant it and take care of it, you're going to have differing maintenance schedules. If you're working in a big old residential garden, it's for sure they got a nice big old swath of lawn, just like in the old country. So you as the gardener will have to mow it, likely on a weekly, once a week kind of a schedule, except in the dormant season where maybe you could get by with once every 2 weeks. But you don't want to let the grass get too tall and then start cutting it. Not only might it clog up your mower, but as you cut too far down, then you'll cutting into its growing point. And then you're going to get dead spots, you're going to get more thatch and all sorts of other problems. So nothing like regular maintenance. If you're working as a gardener, not in a residential place, but rather for a municipality, a city or a county as a gardener, it's likely that you'll still be working with plants, but you also take on another set of challenges that's unique to an urban environment. That's going to be part of the landscape that falls into your realm. One of the places I used to work at was downtown, at a place called the Civic Center. It was later called the Joseph Alioto Performing Arts Piazza. So it's a large plaza, usually for public gatherings. On the one side, you got City Hall, and then you got the courthouse, you got a state and federal building beyond. Over this side, you got the Asian Art Museum, you got the main library, and this Bill Graham Auditorium where they have music concerts. So us as the gardener, every day you get up in the morning, and you go out there and you check the plaza. You want to make sure it's clean, it's tidy, that the kids can come and play after they've been running around in the museum, or that as people are coming and going from the parking lots to the courthouse, that everything is tidy, is beautiful and terrific. So the first thing we would do when you come up in the morning is go to the playgrounds. And there you're checking for two things. One is needles and one is feces. So if your town is anything like any other cities all around the world these days, there's a problem with drugs use and drug abuse. And what happens when the junkies, they get their needles and they're done shooting up, they leave them on the grounds. And the last thing you want is for some little kid to come up in the playground, start playing with it and jamming their friends with it after a nice field trip to the museum. So that's first priority. You gotta pick them up with gloves, put them in a nice red sharps container, bring them over to the hospital, general hospital for medical waste. The second thing is feces. And it's not just dog feces, but in many cases it's human feces. Where people just be walking along. You see all the people in nice suits walking by through and through, but they just drop their pens, poof, and then pull it back up, keep walking. So the custodian's going to say, hey, that's not my job. I'm working on indoor spaces. So you, as the gardener, you got to go through and go get them. So that's what we'll do. So then you get some poos and then you go scoop them up.
Yeah, it's very don't clean.
If you're working as a gardener in a large public space, large public plaza, after you've taken care of the trash and the garbage and cleaned up, everything's nice and tidy, the paths are nice to walk on, then it's more than likely not you have to take care of the large green spaces around which people congregate, which usually means turf or lawns. Over back at Civic Center, we'd often have public gatherings, large-scale public gatherings. I remember our first thing, there would be the Irish parade, thousands would come through and then come out. After that, there maybe be the Filipino fiesta, then the gay pride, and then there'd be like a protest, people will be hanging on the trees, all climbing, the bullhorns all yelling. And so during these events then, tens of 20s of 30s, sometimes 100,000 people will be rolling through your landscape, going back and forth. And so what happens then if you got turf and you got tons of animals standing on top of it, it's like a stampede of bison, they'll be all pressing down, squeezing out the air and the roots of the turf. What do they call this in the landscaping world is compaction. You squeeze it all down. The roots can't even breathe. But in a landscaping situation where you have waves and waves of people continuously coming every weekend, every other weekend, you gotta do special things to take care of that lawn and that turf in order to maintain its health, in order to maintain its viability as a space. In general, the maintenance routine would be after such events, you go through, you aerate it, punch some holes in it, you'd fertilize it, and then also to top dress it with something that gives a good aeration. Usually we would use sand. So in addition to the day-to-day tasks, you would have these other maintenance jobs that you would have to do on a somewhat regular basis, every other week, every 3 weeks or something, in order to maintain the landscape at a standard. So we're here, still talking about landscape maintenance and the scheduling frequency of visits over time, over the course of a year. So aside from your private residential gardens, aside from your large public plazas, which need to be cleaned and cared for every single day, there's another type of garden, for lack of a better word, I'll just call it kind of the naturalistic garden. That's to say, it's a garden that tries to imitate nature herself in terms of how it's designed and its care over time. One of the foundations of this kind of design or this kind of working style is that the plants are all perfectly suited for that soil, for that site. They don't need no supplemental water, they don't need extra amendments, no nothing like that. And the other aspect about this kind of a garden is that it's real densely planted with the appropriate plants. That's to say, as it grows then, it kind of knits together like a tapestry and the weeds are naturally kept out. So this here little patch, we plant it and we come back here maybe frequency-wise with a group of students a couple times a year. That's all it takes. So this is a different kind of way to look at a landscape, but probably something worthwhile to learn from as we move from here going into the future. This here, I'm sitting on a patch of weeds. If you're a gardener doing maintenance, it's inevitable that you will come upon them. There are many ways we deal with the weeds, hopefully before they get here. Sometimes we'll do weed cloth, use a lot of mulch, maybe plant real densely so the plants can just canopy out the weeds themselves. But still, the weeds follow us around, and wherever we cultivate a little bit, leave some bare patches, or if the plants that we planted are stressed out and bring up a little bit of holes, boom, there come the weeds, and then they're in. So when you're thinking about a maintenance routine over the course of a year and scheduling the different things, it's important to knock the weeds out in the beginning. Before they get big, the roots get strong underground, and then they're dropping seeds all over the place, and then you try and knock them down, but the soil is so hard, you can't even pull them out by the roots. Luckily, it's been raining a little bit, so the soil is soft. So if we can get to the core of it, give it a nice tug, the whole thing will come out, roots and all. Otherwise, you just cut it off, leave a nice taproot underneath, and in a week or two, it'll be re-sprouting out. And that's going to add to your frequency of the visits. The place is going to look like it went to junk, even though you put in a bunch of hard work on it. So that's where it helps to understand the life cycle of plants, including weeds, and then to weave that into your maintenance routine. When we're talking about maintenance schedules and setting up a maintenance routine over time, you have to figure out between the client and what their standards and their wishes are, and then in the plants and their growth habits and their forms in the land itself. In some places you might have a client that says, I want all bare dirt, not a single weed. Well, shoot, that's going to be hard. As you know, Mother Nature has got bare dirt, she's going to want to fill it with plants. So you're going to be fighting against nature at the same time trying to please your client. So in that case, the maintenance, the frequency, and the tools that you're to use is going to be a whole different set. You'll probably have to resort to using chemicals, a lot of motorized equipment in order to fulfill those standards. Same thing goes for lawns and mowing. If somebody says, I want that line on the plant super laser line straight, that's going to take a lot more maintenance, more frequency over time compared to somebody that says, well, I don't mind if it's nature and we got a little bit of a round, a little bit of flow, and a little bit of wiggle. I'm willing to live with it. So all of these factors will come into play when you're setting up a maintenance routine, a maintenance schedule for a given landscape or garden, whether it be private or public.